Alright, what is good, YouTube? It has been a minute, a month in fact. Just need a little bit of a break, close the year strong out at the university. But of course, as always, the tennis calendar never seems to stop, constant action going. Clay season this year, of course, in full swing. We've gotten through the bulk of it to this point. Very unusual clay court season, I would say, but, of course I had to bring it back. Rome. Of course, the Masters on clay, where all the players seem to hone in, treated as a bit of a litmus test ahead of Roland Garros. So with that being the case, you expect it to be a really fun event yet again, as it typically is ahead of Roland Garros. But as I noted earlier, bit of an uncharacteristic, weird clay court season this year. Obviously, the usual suspects missing in action for much of it. Rafael Nadal, clay court GOAT, nowhere to be seen since January outside of the practice courts at Rafa Nadal Academy. And then, of course, his great rival in Novak Djokovic, also always so threatening on the surface. He, too, has been dealing with his own ailments with the elbow in his two events on clay so far. Both those situations, obviously, things to keep an eye out for as we head closer and closer to Roland Garros, both to varying degrees as well. I think, Rafa's situation is quite a bit more alarming at this point. Novak, on the other hand, not atypical for him to get off to these slow starts on clay ever since really 2016, 2015. Always seems to peak in Rome, so if he's healthy, you expect that trend to continue here. But even those two guys aside, many of the usual suspects on clay that have really found to thrive on the surface over the last couple of years, a lot of those guys going through their own form of turmoil, Tsitsipas, of course, I would say the best of his generation on the surface, has really proven to be very comfortable on the clay, but ever since that superb start to the year between United Cup and the Australian Open, Tsitsipas obviously been struggling with the shoulder, making his way back to 100%. Certainly he can be given the benefit of the doubt there, but still really strange to see him, take the loss to Fritz in a blitzing, actually, in Monte Carlo after he looked very good in that event initially. Barcelona, Alcaraz just has Tsitsipas in hell with that matchup right now. Not much else to say there. Madrid, I guess the conditions are not a great fit for Steph, given altitude, he can be rushed on return and the backhand. But all in all, not much momentum to really carry into RG. You'd say he needs a big Rome. Another one of his contemporaries in Sasha Zverev, who is now 12-12 on the year. I would say, if he's to do much damage at RG, he desperately needs a big result, or at least a big win. Zverev, of course, on the comeback trail from that brutal injury a year ago at the French Open, and it's really been a pretty mixed bag in his return. Pinpoints mainly the two Medvedev matches in Indian Wells and Monte Carlo, where I said that it looks like Sasha Zverev is going to be contending again relatively soon. Came excruciatingly close to winning both those matches, but, the documented usual Zverev issues in crunch time definitely had their hand in both those matches. But watching him there, all the facets of what makes Sasha such a pain to play for so many of the top guys when he's on full display. And then in between, you see the matches against O'Connell in Munich. A match, against Chris O'Connell, who can be formidable on hard courts, grass courts. You don't expect Sasha Zverev to lose to him on clay, especially not in straights. And then in Madrid, arguably Sasha's best event in his career at this point, put in an absolutely atrocious showing against Alcaraz in the round of 16. And in contrast to the last time they faced off at the French, when Zverev last year was arguably playing the best clay court tennis of his career, he looked pretty toothless out there, not really much he did to put Alcaraz under pressure, didn't really even put that many balls in play, really just had nothing going for him on the day, and, albeit it's a brutal injury he's coming back from, it's the main reason I omitted him from my top 10 at the end of the year. It's one that I wrestled with, but, an injury like that with that much trauma, Obviously, it's going to be hard to come back, but I would be lying if I said I didn't think Sasha would be further along at this point, especially given what I saw at Indian Wells and Monte Carlo. But that's another guy that's, been a staple on clay these last couple of years who has been flailing in comparison throughout the course of this clay court season. And then when we talk about flailing, I can't not mention Casper Ruud, not just for this clay court season, but for the entirety of the season so far. Casper, of course, enjoyed a career season last year, 2 Slam finals, including the French Open final, and, he's built his reputation, really, on excelling on clay. And among this season, he has the title in Estoril, and that's about it. It's been talked about ad nauseum, how packed his end of last year was, going to South America with Rafa, playing the exhibition tour. Obviously, he himself spoke on it. It impacted his preparation for the next season. He took a break after Australia for that very reason. But with that being the case, you watch Casper Ruud in his action since Australia, and initially, obviously, a bit undercooked, but as a result of that, he really has not gotten that many matches under his belt. There's no rhythm to really have been built up, and that really seems to have compounded now into his confidence being kind of shot. Even in some tournaments like Miami, where I don't think he played particularly poorly, I thought his level was pretty decent, actually. The guy just does not seem sure of himself at all in these crunch time moments within these matches, a lot of untimely errors, and just super nervy play. But what's been even more concerning is that once we've hit the European clay court season now, aside from Estoril, that was the one bright spot, and I'm not even going to pick on it for being a 250 or the field being weaker, because in ruts like this you need confidence back, but that has not translated at all as we've gotten into the meat and potatoes of the European clay court season. In fact, quite the opposite. You could argue his losses in Monte Carlo, Barcelona, and Madrid that have all been quite one-sided to guys that you would favor Casper Ruud against on clay have been among his worst this year so far. And I do realize that a year ago he also struggled throughout the bulk of the European clay court season, didn't really get anything going until Rome and then into the French Open. But because those big results are upcoming that he's going to have to defend, he's running out of time to really get going before his ranking actually is going to be dramatically impacted by how poor his season has been so far. So I've covered all these guys that have either been struggling or unable to take the court, multitude of issues that a lot of the typical guys that thrive on clay have been going through this season. Who has been picking up the slack in the meantime? Well, for starters, obviously you gotta start with the next gen with, Alcaraz, Sinner, Holger Rune, all spearheading that movement. At the time of me recording this video, Carlos is a staggering 30-2 on the year. Number 1 in the race, number 1 in the world at the conclusion of Rome and heading into the French Open. And his spring this year has mirrored, if not even bettered, his spring of a year ago, where he really put us on notice for him being a slam threat right now, not having to wait any longer. And what I'm about to say about him, I think, is applicable to all 3 of those guys. I think that through his run this year, I think Carlos has gotten better this year. What I saw out of him at Indian Wells was, I think, the best I've ever seen him look. Indian Wells in particular, and especially that final, the guy really looked unbeatable. He's rarely ever struggled, but, when he has, many of the problems that people have rushed, myself included, to point to have been, him always playing at 100 miles an hour, being overambitious at times as far as his shot selection goes. But that event in Indian Wells, and albeit those conditions are great for his game, but he gave us a glimpse at a Carlos Alcaraz that seemed a lot more measured, but at no point did it seem like he was being conservative or pulling back. And you saw the outcome of that. The dude rampaged through that Indian Wells draw. It ended in him dismantling Daniil Medvedev in at least one of the best performances of his career to this point. ended Daniil's winning streak in emphatic fashion. And while, honestly, I feel like for much of this clay court season, he hasn't seemed like he's been at his best. But, again, that match against Tsitsipas in the final of Barcelona, that was an exceptional level as well. You saw a glimpse of that yet again. And really, the more that's going to be able to be recreated, the scarier it's going to be for the rest of the field. Like last year, Carlos Alcaraz has again positioned himself to make a serious run to the French Open title yet again. And for many, you'd be hard-pressed to say that he isn't the favorite to lift the Coupe de Musketeers at the end of Roland Garros. And then, of course, you move on to his closest rival at this point, Jannik Sinner, and, it's no secret that Jannik, throughout the course of his season so far, has made some dramatic improvements. His greatest asset, has always been just how clean a ball he hits, his easy power, which right now probably is unmatched throughout the ATP landscape right now. And of course, throughout his time with Darren Cahill, the serve has been a point of emphasis. He's made some technical changes, which have definitely yielded some very positive results. Not a finished product yet on that front, but I think it's definitely on its way to getting there. On several occasions already, we've seen it wreak havoc for, the best of the best. Much like the serve not being a finished product yet, but rapidly improving, you also look at Jannik Sinner's fitness. Obviously, that's been a point of emphasis since, naturally he has a bit of a wiry frame, and in the past he has, really gassed out or had his body break down at the back end of tournaments. And you're not really seeing much of that this year. He's shown a lot better stamina, going deep in just about every event he's played this year. And really, aside from the Miami final, I don't think any type of accumulated fatigue has been a major factor at the back end of tournaments for him. And I think that's only going to continue to get better for him. And, you look at his improvements, you add them on to how formidable he is, how hard he is to beat from the back of the court. Those should, and they have, to this point, translated to clay for him. He has had a really good clay court season so far. I think Monte Carlo was a missed opportunity. It was a tournament that I thought was his for the taking. Really great opportunity there for him to bag his first big title. His loss to Rune in the semifinals was, I think, a little bit choky. Obviously, nobody is immune to nerves, but Sinner still does struggle with them from time to time. But considering how much better a competitor I think he has become and shown great mental fortitude over the last year, that's not really something that worries me. I think he too has positioned himself for a big French Open. I think clay does suit him. He made his first big breakthrough making the French Open when he was 19 or 20 back in 2020, beat Sasha Zverev, and pushed Rafa for a good 2 sets in their quarterfinal. So, on the trajectory that he has been on, he should be in for a great French Open ahead. And then getting to Holger Rune, I really can't say that I feel that his improvements have really been all that apparent. I've watched him at times, and he has looked kind of indecisive and uneven in his play. But that being said, I definitely think that it's been a positive season so far. And really, I think his clay court season has been what has lifted up this season for him to this point. Because, albeit not a bad season through the Sunshine Double, there wasn't really anything to write home about in Holger's season to that point. No real big wins, no titles yet. But even that being said, even then, very few early exits. A pretty consistent round of 16 to quarterfinalist type guy to that point in the season. But as we hit clay court season, obviously huge Monte Carlo, huge win in what was pretty close to a classic against Jannik Sinner in Monte Carlo. Came back in that one to snatch it away from Jannik and came awfully close to taking the title. Probably would have, in my opinion, if not for fatigue kicking in through the second half of that final for him. But of course, that being said, shout out to Andrei Rublev. Long time coming for him to finally snatch up a big title. opportunity was going to open up when you're a guy like Rublev, who's been knocking on the door for so long. And amid all these unusual circumstances, that opportunity came about, and Rublev took it with both hands. Super well deserved, consistent as ever. Another guy that has been flourishing this clay court season as well. And much like their Australian Open encounter, experience I think definitely came through again for Rublev over Rune. But getting back to Rune, backed up that Monte Carlo final, of course defending his title in Munich. That final against Botic van de Zandschulp, of course, another display of his spectacular mental strength and resolve at such a young age. Saved that final, I believe, saving 4 or 5 match points from the brink of defeat, van de Zandschulp having chances to serve it out on 3 different occasions, if I remember correctly. And again, really early on in his career, Holger's already displayed such great tenacity and grit. Of course, a lot of people do feel that he's got some emotional maturing to do, but I'm not totally opposed to the feistiness. It seems pretty ingrained in, his competitiveness and just who he is on a tennis court. I would argue the physical maturing is the part that needs to come further along and should be of greater emphasis for him. You still see, cramps and fatigue settling in for him in these long matches or deep in tournaments. But nonetheless, he too suited great for clay, and there's just so much to like about his game, so well-rounded, and seems like quite a tough cookie to boot. Coming off a French Open quarterfinal appearance, as well as an upset of Stefanos Tsitsipas last year, he's definitely looking to be a tough out in Paris this year as well. And, in conclusion, I think the triumvirate of Alcaraz, Sinner, and Rune really has carried the entertainment value of this clay court season so far. As strange as it has been, with so many of the usual suspects suffering for one reason or the other. And yeah, that's all I've got for this video. We are into the home stretch of this year's clay court season. I think historically, at least in my view, Rome and Roland Garros have proven to be the most fun clay court tournaments of the year. So we should be in for some good action over the next couple weeks. I'm going to attempt to shake off a little bit of burnout and be more consistent throughout the course of the rest of the year. So if you enjoyed this video, it would be much appreciated if you could drop a like and help the video perform better in YouTube's algorithm. Only takes a second and it makes a world of difference. And also subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Thank you all again so much for watching, and of course I will see y'all in the next one.